So, how differently would you be thinking and behaving right now if you knew that money would never run out? Did you know that when we are experiencing scarcity, especially financial scarcity, we actually have like a 13-point drop in our IQ? So not only are we feeling and living in that fear, which has all this impact on our nervous system, but we are actually acting in a way that is dumber. We are not making the best decisions. And this becomes really cyclical, right? Because the poorer the decisions we make, the worse our reality can become. The other thing that happens is the tunneling effect, where we start getting so focused on instant solutions to our problem because it's so uncomfortable that we start to lose track of the long term. And this can get us again into really bad behavior, especially as entrepreneurs, where we start to have a sale, have another sale, build a new product. We start making these rash, impulsive decisions to fix the current reality, and we really start to cause bigger problems for ourselves for the long term because we are not focused on building that security or that wealth or sustainability. We are focused on getting out of our current immediate discomfort. Hello, if we've not met before, I am J.Nichole Smith. You can call me Nick. I am a color psychology expert and brand strategist. I'm a 44-year-old working mom, American, living in England, and this is the Joy First podcast. And what we are talking about here, especially this season, is me taking the Joy First methodology, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, and applying it to my own life in the messy middle, right? With mumming and working and being a partner and perimenopause and weight loss and all the things that we're trying to navigate as women, doing it all perfectly, while also starting to unravel a little bit because our middle-aged bodies are starting to let us down. The start of season 4 in this podcast is really around the Joy First Audit, which is our baseline quiz inside Joy First for being able to determine where are you at now. And we look category by category. So last time we looked at vitality. This week we are looking at money and security and freedom. And this one is so unbelievably important, as we all know, because money makes the world go round. When we start off as entrepreneurs, which I know not all of you are, but we all want financial security, right? But we also want freedom. And the dance that takes us from the corporate job to the side hustle to our own business is really about getting that balance right between feeling like we have the financial security we need to feel safe and therefore have easier access to joy, and the freedom that we want to, go where we want, do what we want, be there for our kids, have a life and an identity outside our kids. And that often can be at the opposite side of financial security, which many of us discover when we jump out to start our own business. So today, I'm going to start out by sharing a little bit about my background when it comes to entrepreneurship and financial security and freedom and money, and some of the disasters, some of the successes, some of what's worked for me. And then I'm going to take you through my audits, how I scored on the money and security side of the audit, and what that means about what I'm doing and focus on now in my own life and business. As I mentioned, I've been entrepreneuring for 20 plus years. I've never really had a proper job, and that's been a roller coaster, and we're going to talk about it. So my journey started in a very challenging way. So first of all, I dropped out of college because I couldn't afford to pay for it anymore and started my business as a photographer. The year I did that, I had all my equipment stolen and I had rented some equipment as well. I was hired to be a official photographer for Farm Aid, which if you're not familiar with it, this is a concert series that happens in the States that benefits organic farming and family farming. And I had this huge, amazing opportunity to be an official photographer for that show when it came to Seattle. And my boyfriend came with me. We shot the whole thing. It's Dave Matthews, Willie Nelson, unbelievable, incredible acts. It was such a great experience. I shot digital. I shot film. I had to rent the digital camera because it was so early. I think this was maybe 2003, maybe. I need to look up the year. And so I had rented a digital camera. I was shooting film, which is the camera I already had. I was, remember, a dropout college student, renting the camera was a stretch. And the bottom line is my boyfriend's car got stolen with all of this stuff in it. I had already dropped off one roll of film at the local camera place because I had dropped it in water and I wanted to see if they could salvage it. And so I had already dropped that one off. Everything else was gone. I had backed everything up the night I shot it onto, USBs and whatever, but they were also in the car. So aside from that drama, what it meant was the little bit of savings I had to go to the camera company to pay for the camera that I had rented that got stolen. My insurance didn't cover it because the car didn't show sign of forced entry. So even though they caught the guy and were able to get the car back, all the stuff was gone, but he had used Honda keys to go around and steal Hondas. And so the insurance I had didn't cover it. I had to pay for it out of pocket. That was it. That was all the cash I had to start my new business, to pay for my life. Not a great start. Then I actually started my business officially. I had a business partner. We went into a trademark licensing agreement to have a studio and a retail store. Sounds great, right? But the company that we went to collaborate with, that we paid $50,000 to, and this is a loan we got, and she, secured it with her house, and we agreed to split paying it back over time. The day came that we were opening our shop, and they were supposed to supply us with all this product that we had spent $50,000 on, and it never came. It never came. So we're opening up the studio in this retail place, and the retail place was empty because the product we had paid for never came. So instead of clinking champagne and celebrating, we were filing a lawsuit, and that began in 2005, and it went on for over 4 years. So what that meant for me in those early years was I was working my ass off to pay the lease of our premises, make enough money to pay our legal fees and the debt on the loan that we had taken out for the product we never got. And try and survive and live, which there wasn't a lot left over to do. So that was the first 4-ish years in my business as an entrepreneur. It was rough. So my relationship with scarcity and money and security is a very complicated one because my origins were dark. I burnt out twice before I was 30 because in the midst of all this, I started a second business, Dog is Good, with some partners. And that business took off and it started doing really, really well, but we didn't pay ourselves because it was a t-shirt company and we had loads of costs to be able to create loads of product. And lots of the time we would sell that product and not get paid for it for 60 or 90 days. And we just kept reinvesting in that business. So I had several years at the start of my entrepreneurship journey where I had less than zero financial security of any kind. I had student loans, I had the debt from the business that I started, and obviously no savings at this point. And it was very intense. I remember there were times where I would have to choose whether I would buy ink for my printer so I could print out prints for my clients that they had paid for, or food for my dog, which was she was a Great Dane and her food was super expensive, or food for me. So obviously the dog came first, then the clients, then me. And it was really hardcore. I couldn't live at home because home was on an island in the middle of the Puget Sound, not a place where it's easy to run a local service-based business from because there was no clients. And it was intense. It was hard. And so there were a lot of patterns that got ingrained during this time around scarcity. Obviously, a ton of fear, a ton of that feeling of just there never being enough. And that ingrained a lot of stuff in me that has followed me all the way since. So this was, 2005. So we're over 20 years ago. And it took several years to get out of this scarcity. 2009 was probably started to be around the time where I started having real financial abundance in my business. I was still paying off that stupid loan that took me another 6 years or something, but the lawsuit was done, the lawyers were paid, and so those expenses weren't still coming. I moved to the city, so I moved to a much bigger market where I could be a photographer and a designer and have access to clients, and that was a big help. I had been in business long enough that I was starting to get the benefits of having been in business business for a while. Is Good was really starting to take off, which was really exciting. So things started getting better and better. In 2011, I had my best year to date in that business. I moved to California. I got my book deal. I had really high profile clients. I had, commercial jobs as a photographer that were paying me, 20, 30 grand, 40, 50 grand. And we were starting to get licensing income from Dog is Good, which some of that we actually got to keep. We were starting to get paid a little bit from Dog is Good. I was doing really well as a private pet photographer, and my average client sales were between 2,500 and 5,000. So it was good. That was a good period. And then I met the love of my life and I moved to the UK. So what that meant was I couldn't work. And I had to go back to school so that I could have a visa. So I was able to go from being a college dropout to having a master's degree by testing in to the master's program, which was super cool. But I had to pay for all that. I had to move my dogs. I had to move me, which all of that costs 12, 13 grand or something. And so we went from, finally starting to build momentum into having to take this massive pause and figure things out. I was not allowed to work on my student visa. And so I had to kind of just live with my boyfriend and go to school and kind of float for a while I figured all of this out. So long story short is I hit kind of another low point in 2015. I had started a retail business. I had finished my master's and was at this low point because I had started a business I didn't want. I had spent a lot of money on that business. And while, some of this early scarcity was paid off and done, and I had experienced financial abundance and security, I now was back in a position where, I'm dealing with visas and stuff. I can't be on a mortgage because I still, was not a permanent resident of the UK, and I'm having to reestablish credit because I'm brand new to the country. And I realized that I was done with the phase of my career where I was doing photography as a service. And I started to shift into doing consulting and using that marketing master's degree. I lost Olivia, my dog. It was sort of like the end of an era. And I went from a low point to building a 6-figure business in less than 9 months when I found my new vision. I do work called why finding, and it was the why finding I did during that time that actually helped me figure all of this out of where I needed to be and what I needed to be focused on. And I started helping pet businesses build better brands and do their marketing. And that was amazing because I had so much authority in this niche that I had been in the pet industry. And I think my first membership, I had an email list of 175 people or something that I hadn't emailed in years since I had lived in the States. And I decided to start this membership for pet businesses. And we had a 70% conversion rate from that list to our first founding member launch for that membership. So that was incredible. And that success continued for a long time. So I was back up. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is to kind of just express that when it comes to money, especially as an entrepreneur, but not just as an entrepreneur, right? You get a job, you lose a job, you get a promotion, you have to stop to take maternity leave. The money situation in our lives is often incredibly cyclical, right? It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And I think we are so trained to believe that it must start at a baseline and go up, 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 and never go down. And if you're extremely risk averse, that might be true. But unfortunately, being neurodivergent in the way that I am and starting from this place of incredible scarcity where it was I had nothing to lose, I was always pretty programmed to take a lot of risks, to be quite impulsive. A lot of them paid off, a lot of them didn't. And it creates this kind of roller coaster, as well as if you have a service-based business, if you do anything one-to-one or in person, if you don't have that sort of passive recurring revenue model, then you often get in this feast and famine mode, right? Where you don't have a steady paycheck and you don't know where the money's coming or if it's coming. And that creates some real instability. And all of these things really create these patterns of scarcity in our lives, which create, so much fear. And back to the beginning where I said, it reduces our IQ. It gives us a tremendous thing to overcome in our nervous system because we're so scared about money and it affects our decision making so much. And it is literally making us dumber when it comes to the strategy. So one of my number one tips when I am talking to founders is to try and separate the building of your brand, especially if you want to build your brand the Joy First way, where you're able to really build magnetism and desire, to have fun with it, to build a brand properly, versus, being in the desperation game of like, I just need to get paid this week, is to separate, that needing money and building a brand thing. So having another job or not quitting as soon as it would be comfortable to quit, because as soon as you get in that financial scarcity, it starts to change how you build and run that brand, which makes it really hard for you to build a brand in a magnetic way. But we're not here to talk about branding. I know, I just can't help it because it is where I come from. So back to the audit, the Joy First Audit. So I've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. You can get access to the Joy First Audit if you join us over in Substack. If you join us for free, you can get the sort of analog version where you can take the quiz by hand. If you upgrade to being with us in a paid role, it is very, very, very cheap. It's like less than $5 a month. Then you can get access to this really cool custom chat GPT I built to walk you through the audit and what your next steps can be. So that's a lot of fun. But what is important about it is that this is helping us create a baseline of our joy right now. And when I say joy, I mean everything in our life, our vitality, financial security, and connection, environment, like all of it. Finding the baseline and getting a score, what I call the joy, pulse, as if you were taking your heartbeat, your pulse, like where are you at right now? Because what happens when you start to improve something like joy is that it's very easy to forget where you were before. It's easy to forget like how bad it felt or how stressed you were or how panicked you felt all the time if you don't establish that baseline. So what I recommend you do is take this audit now and then take it again in a quarter or in 6 months or a year after you've jumped into some of the Joy First stuff that we talk about to improve category by category how you are feeling in your life and body and home and work. And so it's just a really important sort of test. This is something I've done in all the programs I've done since 2015. And I used to call it a happiness quiz, but I've modified it a little and I've added this GPT, which is super cool for making it really easy to go through and then give you actionable advice. So check that out. But what we're doing in this podcast, in this season, we're in season 4, and this is episode 4. We are going category by category through this audit, and I am sharing my score with you and telling you about what I'm doing with the information this audit is providing me. Last time we talked about vitality, I scored pretty low. That is mostly, I would say, perimenopause related. So we had that discussion last time. This time I'm going to tell you about the money, freedom, security side of things. Now, this audit for me right now, as I mentioned, this like cyclical nature for the last sort of over 12 months now, I've been in another low point. Now, what's really interesting is that the very astrological, magical people in my life talk about these 10-year cycles. And I hadn't really realized that, but that last major low point was in 2015. And 2025 for me was another incredibly, incredibly challenging time. I had a fantastic year in 2024, and I made some investments that didn't end up panning out, which I felt the results of in 25. I overinvested in team and paid for that in 2025. And so as a result, I kind of have eaten into my savings and have taken on bigger debts, which caused some stress, and have lowered my income. So I'm not bringing as much home. So I don't have as much disposable income. So I have to actually, be thinking more about what I'm doing in my life at home. It's meant very little travel budget. It's meant, I'm not consuming as much, which is probably for the best anyway, but I've had to let go of my personal trainer and make some other tough decisions that feel like major lifestyle, compromises that I'd rather not be making, but I need to get back on track after having such a difficult year. Because the compounding of all of those choices I made was that last year felt like everything was broken. I had added 15,000 people to my email list, but what I didn't realize is a lot of those people were spam through Facebook ads to our quiz. And so it tanked our email deliverability. And what that meant was the things that seemed to be working based on the data I had, like launches or, email campaigns, the data was all squiffy because I would see a lot of people clicking, but then not as many people as I'd expect to buying. So it was making me crazy. And that is just one example of things that just seemed to break last year. And I know I'm not alone in this. For those of you guys who run businesses or even work, at corporations, last year for many people was extremely challenging as we navigated all the fear in the world and the, AI starting to come in. It was really, really tough. And so I'm back in a low point. Now, this is definitely reflected in my audit. When I took the audit, my score was 9 out of 20. So low. And let me tell you about some of the questions that are in this section of the audit so you can see exactly what we're looking at here. So questions in the security part of the audit are things like, I feel generally secure financially. I know what my monthly expenses are. I can pay my bills without panic. I have some form of savings or buffer. My debt, if I have any, feels light and manageable. I know my enough number and I'm working towards it. I live within a budget that feels realistic, as well as questions like, I have control over my schedule. I can take time off when I need to. I feel safe in my living circumstances. I can make decisions based on joy and not just money fear, right? So these questions are about money, but they're also about security and they're also about freedom, because all of these things are linked. And my experience of working with entrepreneurs for over 20 years is that, this freedom piece is absolutely massive for us. And it is so often linked to financial security, but it's also linked to fear. And sometimes our financial reality is fine, but our fear is way up here and vice versa. So it's important to kind of take all of that into consideration. So with my audit score being 9 out of 20, the report tells me that I'm under-resourced, and it says you have awareness and some structure, but financial safety feels fragile. Overwork and money pressure are quietly driving decisions. And this feels really true for me. And some of this is the reality, and some of this is the fear and the old patterns starting to rear their ugly head, because what happens is we do this work on the fear and the mindset side of money, and then we see successes, we see more security, the money comes in, and then we feel any little wobble, and the old patterns that we thought we had fixed start to emerge again in new and fancy ways. And we start to get into those old ruts of behavior that we might have thought that we fixed. And so I wanted to share with you what I'm doing as a result of getting this number in my audit, and also a couple of resources that have worked for me in the past of people that I've worked with or learned from in order to get past that mindset stuff, as well as some of the really practical stuff. So on a practical level, as I mentioned, I'm reducing costs in my life and my business. And I'm trying to balance the massive reduction in costs with not completely abandoning my sanity. So one of the things that I have in my life is a housekeeper. And she used to come 3 times a week. So she was spending 7 hours a week in our house. And this is extremely important to our life and functioning, because both my husband and I are entrepreneurs. We have 2 kids. We both work from home. And it is like the reason my husband and I never fight, because we never have to fight about dishes or the dishwasher or the laundry or any of this, because we have this level of support. And I've always said, I will eat ramen noodles every month rather than get rid of this person, because it is such a powerful contributor to my nervous system and emotional well-being. And for me, in the values of what we pay for, I'd rather not go on holiday and have her, because just of the level of sanity that she maintains for me in life. But what we have done is we've gotten rid of her 1 day a week. So that has saved a considerable amount of money, but I haven't had to let go of her completely. Also, it's the kind of expense where once she's gone, right? Because she's going to have to go out and get more hours. And I'm not ready to let go of her. But I did let go of my personal trainer, who I've been working with for 3 years, because that was an expense where it's I can get a gym membership. I just need to go. I know what I'm doing now. And I'm taking Monjaro, which is something we talk about inside the Substack a little bit more deeply. And I need to be weight training. I need to be working out as a part of being on, that medication. But I know what I'm doing. I've worked out my whole life. I've worked out with her intensely for 3 years. And while I would love to be able to come back to her, that was an expense I felt more like I could let go of without compromising as much in my sanity as losing the housekeeper. So those are the kinds of decisions I'm making. We are actually living on a budget in terms of like groceries and activities, which before we just kind of weren't ever really having to think about that stuff. Our travel budget has gone way down. And so it's been this balance of, cutting expenses while also trying to maintain and even maximize self-care. So the other thing that we've been talking about is this, and I spoke about it a lot in last week's episode. So you can check that out either here on YouTube or in iTunes. You can check out the Joy First podcast over there. But I'm dealing with perimenopause, crazy anxiety. And so I'm having to really amp up what I'm doing to take care of myself and my nervous system while also reducing costs. So it's a tricky balance, right? Because I am needing space. I'm looking for a therapist to help me navigate my, recent neurodivergence diagnosis, along with perimenopause, along with, just being middle-aged and married and a mom and lifing. So I have to figure out how to do that while also, cutting expenses over here and over there to allow for something like therapy, which isn't cheap. So it's a delicate dance, and it's going to be different for everyone. What I love about the GPT that I've built is it's such a great place to take the audit and then ask questions like, okay, I need this, this, and this, but I also need to do this, this, and this. Like, what can I do to navigate the scarcity or the lack of income and what I need to actually be functional, because it's challenging, right? It is. So this is the state that I'm in right now. I'm in what I would call a little bit of a rebuild stage. The other thing that I'm really prioritizing now, which I have been prioritizing for a while, but I've really, really amped up, is doubling down on revenue that does not rely on me. Now, I say this, I've been doing this for 10 years. I had a membership that was recurring revenue that was fantastic. I closed that down. I've had this before, but the state I'm in my business right now is I don't have that recurring revenue source or passive income in ways I have. And so all my revenue is created by me, every month, every quarter, etc. And so we have been in the process of building some, low ticket items that are $30, $40, $9 to start to build that recurring revenue that is coming from these low ticket offers, which is not a category I've had in my business before, because so much of what I do has been really high end branding, one-to-one, premium agency style stuff. So that is one of the areas that I'm really committed to and focused on, is really low cost but scalable ways to support people. For example, just this last week while I was away on my workation, which is something I deep dove into on the Substack. So that video isn't live yet, but it will be very shortly, where I dove into my week away from my life where I was working. One of the things I was doing there was building out one of those offers for helping with color psychology in a $40 kind of way. And that's something I have prioritized massively. Whereas before, I was doing a lot of these brand in a weeks and done for you branding, which brought a lot more cash in at one time. But, I have to go find it, sell it, deliver it all the time, which is also a stress on the nervous system. So those are the things that I'm focused on right now. Of course, building back up the savings that I've cut into from having a difficult year, paying down debt that I've taken on as a result of that as well. So I know that we're back on the up for where we're headed now, and I know what I need to do. And I expect this number to look really different next time this year. But this one and Vitality were by far my lowest two. And they are the two categories that are weighted the heaviest inside the audit, because they have such a profound impact on our ability to feel joy, right? If you're not feeling well in your body and mind, and if you're not feeling financially secure or like you have any freedom, it is very difficult to feel like joy is accessible. And so we really need to acknowledge that. And that's why these things are part of the conversation around like, oh yeah, joy first sounds great. But if I feel like I don't know how I'm going to pay my mortgage, it's very difficult to wake up and feel light and joyful, right? Now, you can also feel joy, right? You can still, use the Joy First methodology to find, choose, and share joy every day. You can support yourself with color. You can support yourself with nutritious food and being outside and human connection and the things that give us joy. But it is a tougher mountain to climb, right? So the resources, I wanted to share 3 women with you who have been absolutely essential for me on my money journey. The first one is the person who gave me the language of money blocks, which is not something I had language for before I read her book. And that is Denise Duffield Thomas. So she goes by Denise DT. The book that like blew my mind and opened this up for me back in 2015 was Get Rich Lucky Bitch, which you can find on Amazon or her website. I think it's published through Hay House now. It was self-published when I read it, but absolutely transformed the conversation for me about scarcity and money and gave me really, really, really practical tips to fix it. And like, I'm not an affiliate for Denise. She's a good friend of mine. I adore her. The work she does in the world is so important. And she has a money boot camp, which is like a program version of that book, which I just cannot recommend enough because she's amazing. The information works and her community is really warm and wonderful. So that might be a good starting point for you. What I did is bought the book and I worked through it like start to finish multiple times, and it absolutely transformed my relationship with money. And that was at the time when I had that business in 2015, and I went from like a really low point to a 6-figure business in like less than 9 months. That was connected to the work that I did just from her book. So highly, highly recommend. Later, I ended up joining the boot camp to be a part of her community because I just really believe in the work that she's doing, and she really attracts cool people. And she's someone you should definitely follow online because she's an absolute delight. She's Australian. And she's wonderful. So check out Denise DT as an intro into this money mindset, money blocks kind of conversation. Definitely check out Get Rich Lucky Bitch for some really practical ways to begin. Book is going to cost you like $12 or whatever it is. It's a great low cost way to begin. The other person I discovered a little bit after Denise is Ann Wilson, and she has a book called The Wealth Chef, I think also Hay House. And she takes it to that next really practical level of like, you need to have this kind of insurance, and this is how you start investing, and this is how you pay off debt in a practical way. And I absolutely loved her really pragmatic approach, very, very practical, very empathetic, but still pretty intentional. I would say Denise is really like cheerful and soft, and really there's a lot of modalities, spiritual, very energetic work, which is exactly what I needed. And it changed a lot for me. And then you can add on top of that the work with Anne, which is very much like, okay, but how do I start investing? And when can I do that? And what insurance? And how do I find it? Very, very, very practical. And in that kind of starting to create wealth kind of conversation. And the third woman I absolutely love is Catherine Morgan. Definitely listen to her podcast. It is called It's Not About the Money. She has a book by the same name. And Catherine really kind of bridges the Denise and Ann Wilson worlds together. She's like a certified financial advisor. So she has this very corporate, like wealth kind of background. And she's done a lot of different versions of embodied coaching techniques. So she is also deeply embedded in that like spiritual energy coaching. She does a lot of work with EFT, like Denise does. And she's put a lot of time and energy to understanding the way that money affects us in our body and the way that we move through that in order to be able to practically implement the money advice in the real world. And she's absolutely brilliant. She's based in the UK. Definitely check out her podcast and her book. It's Not About the Money. She breaks down these sort of archetypes of the way that we operate, whether we like really oversave or we really overspend, and where the emotional roots of that behavior is and how to fix it, how to move past it. So she's another great resource. If you're someone who's like, gosh, I could really double down on this work right now, Catherine is lovely. Another dear friend of mine who I absolutely adore, and her work is really, really profound as well. So those are the resources I wanted to share with you, women who've really inspired and helped me along the way. The big point that I wanted to make as we kind of look at this audit and get face to face with this reality is that so often the fear is the worst and biggest part. So if you're like afraid to look at it, the audit is a really good place to begin. But then Denise's book has a lot of really practical exercises about how to face it and deal with it. And that's the hardest part. The reality of it is so much less difficult than the shame and the guilt and the fear and all the energetic stuff that we're holding associated with it. The other thing that's really interesting right now, and again, I'm getting this from my spiritual friends, is that we literally today, as I'm recording this, we're in this like eclipse portal. portal. So there's an eclipse happening. And that is such a good time to release. So being able to use this moment right now as we move towards spring, if you're watching this at a time when I recorded it, moving with that energy of letting go, getting rid of the winter blues and being able to kind of create space for expanding into spring, for being able to allow whatever comes next, and from the Joy First standpoint, it's really like, how do we just face the stuff and deal with it so that we can create space for the joy? If we are so deep in our anxiety and our scarcity and our fear, like there's just no space for the good stuff. And that we need to address just as much as, the color stuff and the practical joy tips and all of that. This is where the work begins. So hopefully you found something today that you found useful or interesting. Next week, we are diving into the connection and belonging part of the audit. Every time I record an episode like this, I hope that it helps you find, choose, or share a bit more joy. So the same is true for today. Please subscribe here on YouTube. Check us out on iTunes. You can follow us there as well. And of course, you can also find us on Substack. I mentioned a few really cool resources we have going on over there. We also have deeper community. So if you actually want to connect and chat, that's a great place to do it. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.